So today I'm taking a look at Unifi. Now Unifi is sort of the Apple of networking here. They've got some really beautiful hardware that is very well designed mechanically. They have a wild fan base that talks non-stop about them on the internet. But unlike Apple, they've historically had terrible support for the current version of the internet protocol, IPv6. So a few years ago, I did a video summarizing how Bill Y, the science fight here, my Unified Dream Router, performed with IPv6, and it was pretty bad. Now I've gotten some questions recently to see if I could update this video for Unifi version 9. So I upgraded this guy, Unifi Network 9.1.120, it's the latest version as of June 2025, and we're going to see how it does today. So I got a full simulated ISP set up here from my routers in the back closet, so I can simulate either a traditional dual stack ISP with carrier grade NAT, where I get 100.64 addresses, or I can simulate 464x LAT. We're going to see what the UDR thinks of that. So if you're interested in seeing if Unifi deserves the praise they get from all their shills on the internet, then come along on this adventure. So I had this guy set up from before. I booted him up with his old configuration, installed all of the updates, so I'm on Unifi Network 9.1.120. Then I did a factory reset, and I haven't touched him since. So he's currently sitting here telling me to plug him in. I've got my green cable that goes to my simulated ISP, back closet back there. Oh, shit. Oh no, he lost an eye. Okay, he's only slightly wounded. So I got this black and yellow cable here. This goes to my laptop. This is my LAN. It's going to be my only client today because we don't really need that much for this test. So let's plug my LAN in and plug my ISP in. And let's go over here. So we'll reload. Yeah, whatever. It's telling me to download the app just to set up my Wi-Fi. I have a laptop here, well, I don't need an app. Okay, so first off, we get no internet detected. So right out of the gate here, I started with 464x LAT. So I'm providing IPv6 natively. It could do Slack if it wanted to. It could do DHCPv6 if it wanted to. It could do DHCPv6 prefix discovery if it wanted to. And it appears to have done none of those things. So it's just waiting on me to give it IPv4 internet. Other configuration options. They support PPPoE, but they can't support IPv6. Okay, guess we're going back to dual stack. Okay, we're plugged in. Test connection. What do we got? Testing your modem to determine if it can connect to the internet. There we go. Okay, so I've been in a packet capture this whole time. Once this guy gets set up and into the OS, I'm going to capture and see if it even tried to do DHCPv6. Maybe it's not happy with my test setup, or maybe they just don't believe in the internet. So we'll see about that. And no IPv6 at all. So we've got multicast listener reports from my router. We've got router advertisements from my router, and that's it. So out of box initial setup here, this guy did no attempt at IPv6 whatsoever. So if you just set up your network by default, you will be in the bottom 40% or so of internet users in the United States. So depending on metrics, of course, the US currently ranks about 52 to 60% IPv6 adoption. That's greater than half, obviously, and that's either traffic on the internet or support by hosts or support by servers, depending on who you ask. Now, if you're in France, Germany, or India, that number is closer to 80% now. India is about 77%. France, I think, is at 75%. So you're in a pretty small minority if you don't have IPv6 support yet in those countries. Okay, settings, internet, WAN. So we are in auto mode, which should configure everything properly, but it's not. So hit manual here, you can see the default IPv6 configuration is disabled. So let's kick that over to DHCPv4 and apply changes. Oh, I got to pick a prefix delegation size manually? It's the kind of friction that makes people not adopt IPv6. I should be able to plug a router into the internet and have it just work properly. The whole point of DHCPv6 is to give prefixes to routers so they can distribute them to clients. It shouldn't have to have me put in a prefix delegation size here. It should just ask the server for whatever it can get and take whatever the server gives it back. This is going to vary depending on what your service provider is. The guidance is that service providers should be giving out a /56 for residential customers or a /48 for business customers. Now, this is used in both instances, so should it default to 48 or 56? How about 60? How about 64, 62, some of those weird prefixes? It should just take whatever it gets back, but it's not. It's making me type it in. I happen to know the answer is 62 on my test setup, so let's go. I know 62 is a weird number. Comcast is very stingy and they give me a 60. And so to delegate that further, it just gets smaller and smaller each time. So 62. Let's see, did you figure yourself out yet? How do I even tell if you figured it out? Where is your information? Okay, so now I come back to this page. I got a v6 address here. At least we have a column for it now, right? What prefix did we get, though? I don't know what prefix we got. So if I go over here to networks, you don't have v6 because you disabled that by default too. So let's go in here, go to v6. You got nothing again. You're just disabled out of the box. Pick primary, auto. Yeah, sure. So now do you have v6? Bill White, do you have a v6 address? There you go. You are at CCCC1. Okay, that's something. How about Spaceship 3? Do you have an address? You have one ending in 2222. I'd like to point out that 2222 is just one of the addresses, and I actually have another one ending in 91B2 that it doesn't show me. Great. So I do wonder if their system is going to properly track all the additional v6 addresses you get with modern clients. Modern clients generate new v6 addresses basically all the time. So on iOS devices, this happens like daily. We get new temporary addresses. Perfectly normal thing to do. And if they're only tracking like the one address, then they're doing it wrong. Come back over here to client devices page. Again, IPv4 is primary. It does have v6 down here though in the sidebar, so that's not as bad as it could be, I guess. Okay, so I can change columns. I could add a MAC address column. That's probably not terribly helpful. But no IPv6. So that's not an option. Just v4 is an option here. So Insights here is the next tab and take a look at. It actually doesn't show any flows because nothing has been blocked. So over to activity, I can see traffic going on. And let's try looking at Spaceship 3. So it does again show the v6 address here. So that's at least something. If we click on Analyzer, we should be able to see what's going on here. So again, it's showing me just the v4 addresses. It's connected at v4, etc., etc. But it does actually show v6 sometimes. And over here in Viewer 2, I can see the v6 subnet and the v4 address of all my connections here in Insights, even if it wasn't on the main page. I've also got this whole usable IPs thing, which wouldn't be a problem if we had IPv6. And internet, so I've taken care of these three. So next up we got VPN, security, and routing. So we'll do VPN first. So last time I tested Unifi, nothing in the VPN menu could support IPv6, not a single one of them. So I'm going to try all the different options here. Let's see what we got. Site-to-site VPN. Okay, so I could use SiteMagic, but I only have one. You use OpenVPN or IPsec. We'll use IPsec. Local IP WAN. You have more than one IP here. What if we use your 2001? Nope, it says IPv4 only. So I can only have IPv4 for my site-to-site VPN. For IPsec. Remote IP or host name. Route-based, policy-based. We'll do route-based. And we'll say we're going to do... Oh, it let me do it. It let me add it. That's an improvement. Oh, let me add that one too. Nice. Okay. So I can add v6 routes. I just have to use v4 underlay. Seems like with IPsec. I find that very interesting quirk because IPsec, sort of famously, does not deal with network address translation very well. IPsec was originally developed for IPv6 to encrypt packets at the transport layer, but it got sort of abused to encrypt tunnels that were then established between systems. So nowadays you can have route-based IPsec, but it still doesn't really like going through NAT. And by forcing everyone to use IPv4 only on the underlay, you'll probably have a much worse experience with your VPN because you're stuck on IPv4 transit. But at least we can send v6 routes. That's the big thing, right? So their defaults are IKV1, AES-128, SHA-1, Diffie-Hellman Group 14. I think it's a 24-hour lifetime. Why? These are all terrible choices. IKV1 is not a great choice. AES-128 is perfectly fine. SHA-1 has been deprecated because collisions have been found. Now the chance of it actually happening in the wild are still very low, but that doesn't mean we should be using SHA-1 for any reason. And we also shouldn't be using classical Diffie-Hellman anymore because, well, I mean, that's not the worst choice, I guess. Elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman would be a more modern choice. Okay, what if I do OpenVPN instead? Pre-shared key will generate one. IP address. Local tunnel address. This one, okay. Yep, again, that one's got to be a v4 address. Cipher. Well, Blowfish. Who the hell is using Blowfish? AES-256 GCM, that's definitely what we should be using. CBC and Blowfish. What? What? BF does mean Blowfish, right? I'm not crazy here. They're using Blowfish. It looks like I still can have a v6 route, though, so that's something, I guess. How about a remote IP of 2001 DBA 6969.420? No. Do not like that one. Okay, well, it's like half here. Okay, VPN server. Let's try WireGuard. WireGuard has excellent support for IPv6. Let's see if we can do... Nope, we need v4 for that one. Great. They're using v4 again here. Can I do... What the heck did you do? How did you turn that into 41? What are you doing? That is so weird. FD69 Beef Cafe. That looks like a bug. That's a pretty funny bug. Okay, so I got -1 usable addresses across the entire IPv4 range based on that. I'm guessing OpenVPN server is going to be similar. Can I tell you to be a... Yep, you can't be a v6 either. Can do radius though. Let's see if we what our radius looks like. We'll let you use it for wireless and wired. We're going to use RadSec. Yeah, we'll figure that in a second. Nope, you got to be a v4 address. Can you take a host name? No, you can't take a host name either. That's dumb. So, no v6 for the radius servers either. I have, of course, done videos in the past setting up radius and free radius as an authentication server for wired and wireless clients, which would be great with Unifi, except all of my examples use IPv6, so I guess you're out of luck. Now, they don't even support DNS names either, which I guess is kind of common in radius. Radius is kind of a weird protocol, but that would have been nice. They do support RadSec, though, which is TLS, so I'll give them that. That is good. How about client side? What can I do client side? Okay, a configuration file contains an invalid or is missing the below WireGuard option. IPv4 address on address line is not valid. This is a config, by the way. It says address is an IPv6 address. So far we are entirely thumbs down on doing IPv6 VPN on Unifi. All of the options appear to not work. So how about security? Let's upgrade to the zone-based firewall. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so zone-based firewall is doing its thing. So let's look at the rules for internal, source internal, destination external. So we have IP version both. Okay. Let's create a policy. Okay, we're going from internal, source zone internal, destination zone external. IP version. Okay, I can pick v4, v6, or both. That's nice. TCP, UDP, custom. So I can pick an IP. Can I add an IP address here? Yes, I can. That's something. Now, Unifi has never been known for having a good firewall, but coming from OpenSense, where I have the ability to create lists of IPs, for example, in OpenSense I can create IP lists that get populated from DNS. So I have, for example, all of the services that I host on the internet. I create a list in OpenSense of their DNS names. Then it goes and it looks up those DNS names and adds those as firewall rules inbound. So if I'm hosting something that I want accessible publicly, then OpenSense queries DNS to get the address of it. That means if I ever have to change the address of it, I only have to change it in DNS and not also in the firewall. So here I would have to manually enter these things in the firewall if I want to allow them. But at least I have the option of doing them in IPv6, which back in version 8 was a huge pain. Okay, how about routing? Policy-based routes, port forwarding, static routes, OSPF. Wow, static routes. Let's do static route to... well, I can create an IPv6 static route. That's like the bare minimum for router. We can add SSH access too. Yeah. But I got to add a password. I can't do key-based auth. I don't know who told Unifi that password-based SSH was a thing, but it definitely shouldn't be a thing. You should be pasting in your host public keys here. But no, we got to type a long-ass password with numbers and symbols and capitals and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, it says Unifi. Got their whole EULA thing. And you have an address. That's a start. Wow, they have a lot of weird internal interfaces going on here. 42 of them, to be exact. Oh, look, this guy appeared here on the homepage now that he configured himself. Well, that's something. Still don't have him on LAN, but whatever. So, when I reviewed Unifi Network version 8, a year or two ago, the IPv6 state was pretty bleak back then. And I'm sorry to say, in Unifi Network version 9, they've barely improved anything. So out of the box, this thing is making a zero attempt to set up IPv6 with the ISP. At the very least, you should be doing a DHCPv6 prefix request. You should be setting that prefix up on your LAN, and you should be setting up a basic firewall for outgoing connections only. It is doing none of that. Now, if you want to be better than the bare minimum, you should also support features that modern ISPs are deploying, like 464XLAT, MAP-T, MAP-E, DS Lite, etc. These are really being deployed around the world, and Unifi can't support any of them. Now, I really can't dog on Unifi hard enough about this being a default problem. Unifi likes to brand themselves as very high-end hardware, but these guys are like the enterprise hardware people use when they don't know how to set up networking. And for a lot of businesses, that's what they need. They need something that's easy to set up because they don't have a full-time IT person, or they have one full-time IT person and that's it. Unifi is perfect for them. They're going to plug this in and they're never going to see IPv6. Their ISP is going to support it, and they're not going to get the benefits of the lower latency, less NAT. They're going to have to think about how many subnets they can have, how many addresses in a subnet. Unifi even tells you how many usable addresses you have in a subnet. With IPv6, that's just not a problem. You just have a subnet, it fits all the devices. It's just how it is. So sometimes I like to think about like how this would be deployed at one of the schools I work with. So some of you guys know I mentor a robotics team. I don't work in IT at the school there, but I can see what they're doing. I can see what vendors they're using, things like that. They're not using Unifi, but they have the same default problem with IPv6. The vendor they chose disabled IPv6 by default, and so they just don't have IPv6. They have an excellent fiber ISP. It's a Michigan local ISP that runs the Detroit Internet Exchange. So I know that they could get IPv6 from their transit provider if they wanted to, but they're not. They're just doing IPv4 with NAT. And they even went past the 172 range. They went on to 172.33, which isn't what you're supposed to do. I can totally see someone doing that with Unifi too. So Unifi is trying to make everything easy by really simplifying networking. And the problem is they've done that with IPv4. IPv4 is not as simple as IPv6. You have to do things like think about how many addresses you have per subnet. How big should a subnet be? What should its mask be? Things like that. Those are just problems that don't exist in IPv6. So that's what Unifi actually does. Once you enable it, you can have it on WAN doing prefix delegation. You can have it on LAN, and I guess you can see clients that have IPv6 addresses. But again, that's where the support ends. They just have the bare minimum to get IPv6 to clients. I will say the new zone-based firewall is very nice. It does merge IPv4 and v6 together, which is a big problem they had before the zone-based firewall. So I will give them credit. They did that pretty well. So once you get out of the basic routing and firewalling, v6 support basically falls off an even harder cliff than it had already fallen off of. So in the VPN world, they support a lot of different configs. They support WireGuard, OpenVPN, IPsec as a server or as a client, and basically none of those support v6. So in the site-to-site options, you have the option to add a v6 route, but you don't have the option to add a v6 tunnel address. You're stuck with not having a tunnel address. So I'm not sure how OpenVPN will like that. OpenVPN generally wants to have a tunnel address. IPsec doesn't require it, so I guess it could work with IPsec on a v4 underlay over the internet. But again, you're having all the problems of dealing with v4 NAT. You're forcing your ISP to deal with a ton of v4 traffic for you, which they probably aren't going to be happy about. If you're in a relatively modern ISP, like literally half the ISPs in the world at this point, your v4 traffic is already a second-class citizen. If you're running like MAP-T, MAP-E, DS Lite, even CGNAT, your traffic is being encapsulated and natted by the ISP, and that's introducing a latency that IPv6 doesn't have. So Unifi customers will be stuck with all that. And I had a VPN config that is something I've really used for VPN. It's not the one I'm using anymore, so all those keys have been rotated many, many months ago. But it wouldn't import it because it didn't have a v4 address. So great. Same with Radius too. No v6 support for Radius, so I guess you can't follow my Radius guides that I love to talk about so much. I do love Radius. Well, not really. I hate Radius, but I love the things you can do with Radius. And v6 support is perfectly fine in Radius, and they can't do that either. So that's basically what I think about Unifi Network 9. Unifi could easily enable DHCPv6 client by default, have it so that you by default get a v6 prefix allocation from your ISP, forward that onto the LAN side. That should be part of their defaults. When you create a new network and click auto, it should have IPv6 set to auto as well, not disabled. Same with a WAN. When you create a new service provider, it should be set to DHCPv6 prefix allocation, not disabled. If they made a relatively small change to their defaults there, most of the people using Unifi would have IPv6 up and running with no effort. It's just that they haven't done that, so they get nothing. And if you actually want to do anything more advanced than just having a network, Unifi's probably not going to do it for you. You should probably try something else. I've made some cool videos on OpenSense if you want to check those out too. I should probably update those too. It's been about a year or two, so yeah. If you guys want to chat with me about IPv6, by the way, I now run a stateless IP and ICMP translator if you're into NAT 6.4. You can check my GitHub for Taiga. You can chat with me on my Discord server, link down below for that. If you're interested, I have a Ko-fi. It's kind of like a Patreon, but it's only a one-time thing. I accept donations there. I really appreciate those as well. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next adventure.